welcome to our Edlovich-Tizer Family Relations Forum program in partnership with the Jewish Book Council. And as you know, or many of you know, I'm Rabbi Susan Shankman from Washington Hebrew. I am delighted to be with all of you this evening and joined by my partner, Stephanie Tankel, our Director of Lifelong Learning at Washington Hebrew Congregation. And we're so thrilled to bring this program. And I'll talk about I'll introduce our speaker in just a few moments, but I do want to set the stage for us in terms of where we find ourselves in our Jewish calendar, and thinking about, we know today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and so we think, of course, of where we are physically, geographically, and somebody on here, I'm sure, knows what land we find ourselves on depending on where we're sitting. I know where Dr. Koplewicz is, it's different land than where I am in Potomac and where Stephanie is, and if someone knows which land we are, I am blanking, it's with a P, but it's not Potomac. You can put that in the chat. But also thinking in terms of our heritage as American Jews, and as we think about our cycle of the year. We're about a month into the school year, but we also are just a few weeks into a new cycle of reading the Torah. And it seems so perfect and appropriate that we are reading from Genesis, from Bereshit, and we're reading the Parshat Lech Lecha this week. Lech Lecha being the Torah portion in which Abraham is called by God to go to a land. He doesn't know where he's going, but God says, go to a place. I will show you, I will direct you there. You're going to leave everything you know. You're going to leave your father's home, the country of your birth. You're going to leave everything behind and go to a place. He doesn't know where he's going. But because Abraham has Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his nephew, with him, he's surrounded by the people who he knows and trusts. He knows that he can overcome whatever lies ahead, the uncertainty of life and the journey that is ahead. He's not out there alone. And so this evening's program is in part not just because of where we are in the Jewish calendar. We just lucked out in being in this particular parsha this week. But really, we are on a journey together as a community, having opportunities to learn together, to grow together, to provide resources, so that we are, as we know, it takes a village, and it takes a synagogue, and it takes a community to raise children, to raise families, and to do it in a way that is not just healthy, but also to do it with a sense of wholeness and holiness. And so tonight we are delighted to bring to you, in partnership with the Jewish Book Council, our speaker, Dr. Harold S. Koplewicz. And I think, who is the founding president and medical director of the Child Mind Institute, which is the only independent national nonprofit dedicated to child and adolescent mental health. One of the nation's leading child and adolescent psychiatrists, Dr. Koplewicz was previously founding director of the NYU Child Study Center and served as director of the Nathan S. Klein Institute for Psychiatric Research. He has been interviewed for multiple national broadcast and print outlets, and his writing has appeared in Time and USA Today. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology and is author of several books, including The Scaffold Effect, Raising Resilient, Self-Reliant, and Secure Kids in an Age of Anxiety. The Child Mind Institute's award-winning website, childmind.org, has brought accessible information to more than 50 million parents, teachers, and mental health professionals. During the coronavirus pandemic, Dr. Koplewicz led the organization in a digital transformation to bring families everywhere mental health support, including telehealth treatment, hotlines for frontline professionals, resources for underserved communities, and hashtag We Thrive Inside, a celebrity social media campaign that reached more than 250 million people. I know that some of you saw several links, one to the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna, one to Dax Shepard, and also Dr. Koplewicz was on Join the People's panel, People Magazine panel, Let's Talk About It, Youth and Mental Health, a conversation with the cast of Dear Evan Hansen and People. And so we hope that you'll take time to view those at another time as well, and we're happy to share those links again. But really are so delighted to have Harold with us this evening. We're going to place links to the website in the chat, and also for those who may not already have the book, to be able to provide a link so that you can purchase this book. Again, tonight is in part through our Edlovich-Tizer Family Relations Forum, but also in our partnership with the Jewish Book Council. Want to remind everyone to remain on mute so that we can all hear, and as much as possible. I know there may be things going on where you are, just as there are in all of our homes, but hopefully we can all share in this moment. But we also know that you may have questions, and so we invite you throughout our program this evening that if you have a question you would like to direct to Harold, that you can direct those to me or to Stephanie Tenkel directly in the chat. So Harold, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And just again, if you don't already have this, and we hope that you'll take the time, everyone will remind you later. But Harold, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your wisdom, your insights, and for being a wonderful resource for our community.
I'm delighted to be with you. And, we spoke about this before. It would have been great to do this in person. But COVID, I don't think any of us could ever have imagined COVID. And the fact that I thought in July we were coming out of it, and I think the fact that these variants have come back is one of the reasons I think we're so anxious, and some of our kids are more anxious now than they were before. But this is the way we're going to communicate for a while. And sometime in the future, either you'll come to New York or I'll come to DC. We'll definitely have a cup of coffee, and maybe we'll be able to do something in person. But I'm delighted that we're able to make
We would love that. I'm sure we can think of wonderful religious school and early childhood and all age teenagers, upper school programming for all of our for parents and children. So thank you so much for being here. So we're gonna dive in and wanted to invite you, if you want to open and share some initial thoughts as we get started, and then I know we already have lots of questions.
So I would just start by saying, I wrote the Scaffold Effect before COVID. I actually read the Scaffold Effect for Audible during COVID, and I actually thought that sounded so cool that they wanted me to read my own book, and it was so authentic. It is an incredibly unpleasant experience. I would not recommend it for anyone. You have to stay in a glass box, and COVID, the director can't be near you, and you're talking too fast, you're mispronouncing words. But the telltale sign of the whole thing was I came home and said to my wife, we should have written this book. I should have written this book 30 years ago, because boy, did we mess up. There's so many things that I was behaving like a helicopter parent or a concierge parent and not a scaffold parent. And I think the important message here is that a scaffold parent really helps hold up the construction of a building. So as a building is going up, the scaffolding is really important. And there are pillars, and those pillars are encouragement and structure and support. And then there are planks that you stand on as the building is going up. And they include warmth and awareness, and monitoring and dispassion, which I happen to be very bad at dispassion. I'm very excited for my kids' success, and I always feel very, I have to hold back when they don't do well, because the last thing you want to do is make them feel bad about their lack of success or a failure that they have, because failure is an option. And I think that particularly during COVID, when you have a catastrophic event, if your scaffolds aren't strong, if you shake them up a lot, the building will come down. And if there was ever a time for us to be doing self-care, that self-care is always childcare, but I think it's essential right now that we really have to take care of ourselves. I mean, that metaphor that you're on the airplane and the air pressure drops and you should put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your children is really important, because if you're not breathing in and breathing out, you can't find the energy or the strength to take care of your kids. And I think it's so easy to let self-care fall to the bottom of our list. And if there's one thing that you get from this conversation, it's that self-care is essential right now. And, do 4 things, only 4 things. Sleep 7 hours a night, stop with Netflix, put your phone away, just minimum 7 hours. Number two, do 20 minutes of exercise every day. You don't have to go to the gym, go take a walk. Just move your body, get the blood going. Let's flush new blood through your brain, that just 20 minutes. Number three is, eat something green. My internist said to me in the middle of COVID, Harold, you better be careful. There's three outcomes from COVID: hunks, chunks, and drunks. And no offense, Harold, but hunk left a long time ago. So I was trying very hard not to, have, a vodka at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and then a glass of wine, and then more dessert. And so eating something green, having a salad every day really makes sense. And last, be spiritual. So if you can't go to services at synagogue, well, then just do meditation for 5 minutes. Just for 5 minutes, sit with your thoughts, close your eyes, and let your thoughts go in and out. Don't judge them. And that 5 minutes, maybe with an app like Calm, can turn into 20 minutes. And the reason why you want to do this is that's a great model for your kids. If your kids see that you are exercising, that you are sleeping, that you are eating properly, that you're even meditating, that's really quite important. And that's the most important thing. We'll talk all about what we should be doing for our kids and how to redraw blueprints, and how, even if you have a 16 or a 20-year-old, how you can still change your parenting. But the number one thing right now is self-care. Please try to take care of yourself because COVID's not over, unfortunately. This is going to be a bumpy ride for a bit longer.
And you talked about it. It's the thing we all know from getting on airplanes, and I know it's mentioned a few times in the book, that it's all about putting on our oxygen mask so that we can help others sitting around us. And right. Certainly a lesson that many of us learned the hard way during this COVID time, but also something that has hopefully for many of us also sustained us. So tell us a little bit more about the scaffold effect, what it is and how it's different. I was glad to hear, and you had shared this with us last week, that even though my kids are 13, 18, and 21, it's not too late for me to incorporate the scaffold effect. How is this different from the snowplow and the helicopter and all the different kinds of the teacup? Well, those are the teacup right. Kids, all of those different types of parenting styles.
So I think the most important issue is that if you're a scaffold parent, you are endorsing and reinforcing and rewarding effort, not product. And that's hard because we all live in these bubbles, and these bubbles are filled with successful people, and we get sucked in. Well, my child has to do really well in 5th grade because that's going to go on the permanent record card. And they certainly have to take the right courses in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. And they better do the right extracurricular activities. And if they get a C in math, oh my God, they're not going to be able to get into MIT or to Harvard. We opened up recently a second clinical site in San Mateo, right in the middle of Silicon Valley. And you would think that Stanford was their community college. Oh, of course, my kid's going to Stanford. I mean, why do we, there's no guarantee of happiness or success if you go to Stanford or Harvard. What you really want is your kids to really put effort in and for you to reward that effort. And that's hard sometimes. And also to change your mindset to recognize that failure is an option and that failure is actually a good thing because it gives you a moment to step back and to brainstorm with your child, not fix it, but be able to say, okay, how are we going to help? Is there something I can do to make your studying go easier? It doesn't seem like you spent a lot of time, or you did spend a lot of time. Maybe, do you think a tutor would help? Is there something I can do? How can you have an easier time with math or an easier time with English? And that's very different than sharing disappointment that your child got a C or a D or an F and then praising an easy A. Praising an easy A is just a bad message. So just think about it. If your son has been working super hard on algebra and studying and working with a tutor, and he's just not gifted in algebra, but manages to get a C+ or a B-, that is a grade that should be celebrated because the effort is what you're celebrating. You're being able to say, I'm so proud of how hard you worked and how well you did, versus minimizing that effort because someone else got that easy A. And that's a hard one for us to do because I think by nature, there's a DNA that wants us to rescue our kids. And so if they didn't do well, we want to swoop in, and that's why I talk about dispassion, fire that teacher, give my kid the test again, instead of saying, this is a lesson. What did we learn from this lesson? And how do I stay dispassionate and calm while I'm talking to my child about this? Because that's the important issue at hand. One of my kids had really very bad dyslexia when he was growing up. And it was, we treated it like it was cancer. We found a special program in Boston that had a multisensory approach to learning how to read. He was in 3rd grade, and he was always super bright on all these tests that didn't require reading. And it was really quite shocking to us that the school called us and told us that he physically assaulted another kid. He punched another kid in the nose. And when we talked to him, he started to cry, and he said, this kid called me stupid. And you know what? I am stupid. I was always ahead of everyone in math by 2 steps and behind everyone in reading by 3 steps, but they turned math into reading and, word problems. And then he said, and I'm in the sparrows reading group, and the smart kids are in the hawks reading groups, and hawks eat sparrows. And I felt like saying, well, you're not stupid, but the teacher who came up with these names is stupid. But the fact that, he wanted to do well, he was very feeling terrible about himself. And so the fact that we found a program that would teach him how to decode the language, which most of us can just decode, really became very important. And the fact that he tried so hard, we were always rewarding him and always praising him for his effort. He was, earnest and persevering and frankly, very successful in life now, because he can climb that hard mountain. It's not an easy mountain. In the book, I talk about the fact that Orlando Bloom has dyslexia, and I interviewed him once for the Child Mind Institute. And years later, when Orlando was in Romeo and Juliet, he invited us to go backstage, and I brought that son and his girlfriend, and they were chatting. And my son said to Orlando, so tell me, is it true you told my father that dyslexia is a gift? And Orlando said, yes, it makes me more compassionate, and I feel, better about myself because of, and my son said, well, if it's a gift, could you just tell me where I could return it? Because I'm tired of working so hard and reading so slowly and writing so slowly. And then Orlando said, well, when you find out where you can return it, I'll return it also. So, some of these kids have burdens that are really challenging. And what you want them to do is say, I can climb that mountain. I can carry that backpack with rocks behind me, because I know it, that's essential for me getting to the goal I want to get to, instead of just always looking for great grades or home runs. There's a scene, a wonderful scene in the movie Parenthood, where Steve Martin plays the dad and Mary Steenburgen plays the mom. And the kid they have is just so goofy and wacky and odd and, klutzy. And he's in a baseball game, Little League game. And by magic almost, he puts the glove up and the ball goes into his glove, and he wins the game. It's the third out. And Steve Martin does the remarkable, happy dance. And his wife is very calm, and she's walking with him. And she said, nothing has really changed. He still needs therapy. He still needs, he's still an odd kid. The only difference is that you threw the ball at him 1,000 times in our backyard. You increase statistically the chances of the ball going into his glove. And I thought, that's great parenting. That's the kind of parenting we're looking for. The parenting that takes a child's deficit and tries to minimize it and make it less of a deficit, and a child who has an asset, a musical ear or whatever, and gets them piano lessons. So, but we're not looking for home runs, and we're not looking for a concert pianist. We're looking to help our kids feel better about themselves by getting new skills and honing in on those skills that make them feel, that's their self-esteem. Self-esteem is based on real accomplishment.
And you spend a lot of time talking with not only with children, but also their parents. So
yes.
Share with us, many
parents. But
there's
one story that just, a mother came in to see me, high-powered mom. Her husband was working a lot. She was working a lot. Both of them were in finance. Dad was away for the weekend at some conference. Mom comes home on Friday. She's exhausted. She's just totally exhausted. And when she comes in to see me on Monday, she tells me the story. She said, I really blew it. I'm listening to the story. She said, I came home on Friday. I was really tired. And, Joshua said to me, I have a project for a science fair on Monday. And she said, I looked at this project and I'm sure all the other parents were spending weeks doing it. And, I'm not very handy. She said, my husband was around. I was so upset that we had to have this assignment and we didn't get enough time. And she eventually finds out that her son knew about it 3 weeks before and he didn't let her know. And she got so upset and felt so incompetent and that her son was going to fail. She literally found the telephone. It was a private school, got the telephone number of the teacher, called the teacher at home and just blasted her. How could you do this? Don't you realize that all the parents are doing these projects? Some of us have jobs. I mean, she just ripped into the teacher and hung up. And I'm listening and you're trying not to look shocked. And she said, I know, I really blew it, Dr. Koplewicz. It was really awful. But we spent the weekend putting together a project, kind of like with cardboard and Scotch tape. We knew it was going to be a terrible project. We went to the science fair on Monday. Some of the other projects looked like, they were things for Intel and Westinghouse, even though it was 5th grade. And she said, I did go over to the teacher and apologize. And I started to realize that, I need to spend more time with Josh, that he's not organized. And Josh then said to me when Mom was in the room, he said, I felt so bad for the teacher, but I really felt bad for my mom. And I really felt bad that I caused this. That he said, I just didn't want to do the assignment, so I kept procrastinating. And so I didn't tell my mother about it because I just knew it would be overwhelming. So, there was a lesson learned there. And clearly he did not get an A on that project. It was a pass, but it really changed the way Mom and her son started to look at projects that, a lot of these things take time and effort. They may not always look as polished as we want, but yelling at a teacher or yelling at yourself or yelling at your child isn't going to change that. And I think that, being able to accept that failure can be an option and doesn't mean you're going to raise a failure. It's just that there are bumps in the road where things just don't work out. And for most of us, I didn't go to an Ivy League college. I went to the University of Maryland. I had a fabulous time in college and my kids all went to the Ivy League and my wife didn't go to the Ivy League. And there's no doubt that when you go to those colleges, I think, the classes are smaller. It's a lot easier. You have a different kind of network, but, I don't think it guarantees success at all. I think that in many ways, Maryland helped make me successful in medical school. I was even more of a student. And you mature and there are bumps. It's rare that I've ever met anyone where they were always getting A's and everything was going their way because they don't get that resilience. If we're building resilient, self-reliant, and secure kids, they have to endure some setbacks.
I hear you talking about these setbacks and I can't help but think about the context in which we're having this conversation, right? You've come to us through the Jewish Book Council. You talk about failure, and I'm going to name this, the Jewish educator in me wants to say, yeah, we talk a lot about, we just 1 month ago on Yom Kippur talked about teshuvah and this opportunity within our tradition to say, I'm sorry. And whether the I'm sorry is, I hope, God willing, to the teacher who got blasted, because I think so many of us have been both that teacher, that parent, and that student. I guess I'd love to hear, I know Rabbi Shankman and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about your work through a Jewish context. I'd love to hear how you feel like your Jewish identity has an impact on the work that you're doing now.
Right. So it's really interesting. I was raised in a Reformed Jewish home and with a mother who had no Jewish education because she was Jewish and part of like a Polish intelligentsia. Not only was she in law school when the war broke out, but her grandmother had gone to law school also. So the fact that a Jewish woman, my mother would be 102, which means her grandmother would be, 140, just speaks volumes to how few Jewish women at that time were going to school. So they didn't see themselves, they really prided themselves on being Polish. And my father did graduate law school in 1936, but he couldn't get into the engineering school. there was a quota, and my mother couldn't get into the medical school because there was a quota. And there were Jews who left Poland to go to law school or engineering school in Palestine or in England, and people went to Italy to go to medical school. And neither set of my grandparents were that open-minded to let their kids leave the country. But the fact that my parents were Holocaust survivors, I think really did color the way I was raised and the way I think. So one of the most important things my parents always were hammering was what's in your brain, what's in your head is the only thing that travels. And unfortunately, law doesn't travel. So, the law of Poland is Napoleonic, it's French law, and there's only one state in the Union that has French law, that's Louisiana. And, but you really have to go back to law school. And if you're a doctor, what you get in your head is you can carry anywhere. I can go to any place in the world and I can be a child psychiatrist. And in some ways, I think it was a little scary that my parents actually believed that there would be another episode where we would have to leave our country. But at the same time, I think two important messages kept coming to me. Do something that is important. Do something that is meaningful. Money wasn't as important. And my father used to tell my three sons that his grandfather on his deathbed, who was a very religious man, said to my father, he was the oldest son of the oldest son, so he was the oldest grandson. And he said, I know you're not a religious man, but I want you to look at yourself in the mirror every day when you shave. And if you don't like what you see, you have 24 hours to make it better. And that kind of ethics of, the 10 Commandments, so to speak, or making sure you have a meaningful life that you are giving to others, I think clearly affected me because, I had opportunities along the way to just do full-time private practice or be a TV doc or do something like that. And it never motivated me as much. In fact, I find it very amusing that two of my sons are, bankers or hedge fund or private equity people, and will say to me, oh, Dad, you don't understand money. And sure, I understand money. I just don't have money compared to, I didn't dedicate my life to making lots and lots of money. I dedicated my life to building, institutions and organizations that are going to change the way we think about kids with mental health disorders. And the fact that their brains sometimes impair what they can carry in their brain. That if you have someone who has terrible dyslexia, or if you have someone who has ADHD, or someone who's very anxious, you're not going to be able to learn the way the rest of us do. In fact, during COVID, the learning loss that every child took was significant. The kids who had the most significant learning losses were poor children, were kids in the LGBTQ group who were under stress to begin with, the kids who had anxiety or depression or ADHD beforehand or a learning disability. And so those kids, if we want their learning loss to go away, we have to get them back in school and we have to address the things that stress them and make them very anxious. And so if you were a 16-year-old kid of color in Washington, D.C., and you were barely holding on to school academically before COVID, and you had too many students in your class and too few teachers, and you let go, you just said, I'm done. I can't do asynchronized learning. I can't stand in front of a screen and just watch a video. I think it's our obligation for all of us to figure out how the nation's going to address that, because for selfish reasons, those kids are most probably not going to be contributors. If you don't graduate high school, bad things happen to you. You're more likely to smoke marijuana. You're more likely to get in trouble with the law. You're more likely to go involved in juvenile justice. It's just a bad road. And so if there was ever a time where, the majority of patients who come to us are very affluent and we steal from them to pay for the poor so that we don't turn anyone away. But if we're thinking about our nation, I think it's our obligation, whether these are Jewish kids or not, that it's bad for our nation to have kids who have fallen into a pit because of COVID. And I think COVID, and by the way, if you have an anxious child, you're having trouble getting that kid back to school. They got very comfortable in front of the screen. And the fact that we're anxious, should we wear a mask? Do we have the vaccination? We're in school, we're out of school. Those kids get more and more anxious. And it's very hard to learn when you're not present, when you're not calm. It really does affect what can get into your head. So I think, so clearly being Jewish has had a lot of, I care about people giving, I raise a lot of money every year. I make jokes with my friends who are rabbis who raises more money, and and it's not a popular thing. Mental illness in children is not a popular cause. St. Jude's does a lot better than we do, but I think that if I don't do it, I'm not sure who else will. I mean, I had this funny thing with, I know Hillary Clinton for a very long time, and she recently said, so Harold, who knew it would take a global pandemic for people to pay attention to children's mental health? I said, well, if I knew that, I would have arranged for the global pandemic much earlier, because it is very hard to keep talking to people about the fact that 17 million kids in the United States have a mental health disorder. These are the most common illnesses of childhood and adolescence. There are 7 million kids with asthma, and 7 million kids with peanut allergy, and 200,000 with diabetes, and 15,000 with cancer. And yet those 215,000 does not equal the 17 million. And yet the overwhelming majority of kids who have a mental health disorder do not get treated. Their parents just hope it'll go away. One of the reasons we do all these campaigns with famous influencers is to say that there is hope. You will get through the tunnel. If you're Emma Stone, or you're Michael Phelps, or you're Governor Gavin Newsom, who had dyslexia, you can get through this tunnel. Don't be afraid. Ask for help. And I don't think we do that for cancer anymore, and we certainly don't do that for diabetes. People just know they're supposed to get help. And frankly, if you're a good parent, if you're a scaffold parent, you're not embarrassed. You say, there's a barrier here. Something is interfering with my kid's ability to thrive at work, which is school. We should figure out what that is to make their lives, more productive. Not to get A's, but just more productive and easier.
So that is certainly something that you've taken advantage of. As we've been talking a lot over the last year and a half about finding the silver linings and making lemonade. And
I have to tell you, it's so hard to say a silver lining for COVID, right? Because I personally hate COVID. Whenever I meet people who say, "Oh, I loved COVID. I got to stay home and read poetry," shoot me now. This was like the worst. I love people. I need that camaraderie. I need that brainstorming. I'm making the most of Zoom, but frankly, the thing that was the silver lining is telemental health works almost as well as in-person psychiatry or psychology, and we get more kids to come than ever before. So there's no transportation. If you have a lot of studying to do, if your mom can't bring you. So pre-COVID, the Child Mind Institute saw 200 kids a day in person in California and New York, which is a lot of, I don't think anyone sees as many kids as us. We now see 310 kids a day on a screen, and we see another 50 a day in person. So I don't know when that'll come back, but clearly telemental health is the silver lining. And the other thing is that we were talking about these Zooms. We do science, we do three things at the Child Mind Institute. We provide gold standard care. We only do stuff that has some evidence. If we can't prove it has evidence, then we do research on it, and then it's free. Or if it has no evidence and we're not interested in doing research, we just don't do it. We don't think we should do something that we don't have a body of research. The second thing we do is we do research. We're looking for a biomarker. We'd like to know the difference of the brain of a kid with anxiety versus a kid with depression versus a kid with ADHD. And that would really be like strep throat, right? If you have strep throat, you get penicillin. If you have a scratchy throat and you don't have strep throat, and it's a virus, you get Reston T. And if you have a scratchy throat and you have an allergy, you get an antihistamine, right? And if you have none of them, you just gargle with salt water. So we don't have that yet in psychiatry. It's all history taking. You have to take very careful histories. So this is really important, that biomarker. But the third thing, I think, is to educate the public how real, common, and treatable. So during COVID, we went from 500,000 unique visitors a month to 1.8 million, which means that parents were really looking for an organization that could talk about distance learning, how to talk to kids about racism, how to talk to kids about fears related to COVID. And also an organization that didn't take money from big pharma or from guns or tobacco or liquor. So everyone who wants to give me money, we don't take their money. We only take money from people who don't want to give us money. No, but it's really, you know, we just can't take money from big pharma, because we do think that medicine sometimes is really important in the treatment of kids with psychiatric disorders. And since parents are so nervous about that, the last thing I want to do is make people think, oh, you know, someone's giving him a grant or taking him to a fancy restaurant. And inevitably, by the way, the drug reps, the pharma reps, are attractive and glib and articulate. And all of a sudden you find yourself writing for Luvox instead of Prozac, which is 10 times more expensive. So it's just really easy. Don't let them on the grounds. Don't take any money from them. And so then you're doing things that are scientifically sound. You know, what medicine has the most effectiveness, the least amount of side effects? That's the one we should recommend to a parent. And, you know, and not all parents are willing to do that. You know, I find it very amusing when parents say, I don't believe in medicine. I said, well, the good news is you don't have to believe. The medicine will still work if you let me give it to them. But, you know, I understand where you're coming from. We'll try something else, but let's keep an open mind, because the longer we take to get your kid well, it's only bad for your kid's life, because they're missing out on school or on play dates or so. But it's not good for their brain to constantly misfire.
So you're talking a lot about we, and that's one of the things that certainly comes across in the book as well, that the Child Mind Institute is that there's a team,
Yes.
and now you're on both coasts. And when you talk about what needs to happen across the country, well situated. I don't know if you're planning to go to Chicago or St. Louis or Houston or someplace else, but tell us a little bit about that collaborative effort, because there's stories from all of your, I mean, you have people
all my
with
clinicians,
all
did you
different
see that?
specialties.
Right, they really leaned in. You know, the book's copyright is owned by the Child Mind Institute, and the stories, there are 10 clinicians who really provided stories, and all the patients are hidden. You know, to the disservice of my children, all of my kids, my 3 sons are really out there. And in fact, I did an Instagram with Katie Couric when the book first came out, and she had 100,000 people on her Instagram. And my oldest son, who's 38, texted me when it was over, and he said, oh, I hope you had a very nice conversation with Katie. Please tell different stories. I got texts from friends, I got phone calls, I got emails, tell different stories. Now, it's interesting, his friends are my demographic now, right? You know, they're no longer 60 and 70 years old, they're 30 and 40 years old, they have children, so they're reading the books now. But I think the idea that everyone who joined the Child Mind Institute, and this was very intentional, really believes in evidence-based care, believes that we should do things that other people can copy, that we're not, you know, even our research is open science. We give away our data before we publish, which is very rare, but that accelerates the pace of discovery, right? If you're a scientist at Johns Hopkins and you're a statistician and we're letting you look at all of our stuff, or you're at Rockefeller and we're letting you look at all our genetics before we publish because we don't have enough time to do that, it's perfectly okay with us. Those articles are getting out. So thousands of articles have come out in the last 10 years with our data, and we only published 300. So I think that's important. But I think also, so we have a very exciting project, which I can talk about, even though the press release hasn't come out yet. The state of California gave us a $25 million grant to produce educational materials, including films. It's 35 5-minute films for students who are in lower school, middle school, and high school, for their parents and their teachers to develop more skills to help these kids stay in school. This is all post-COVID. And it will be released in January 2022. And it's in Spanish and in English, which means you have to film it in Spanish, usually with a different cast, and then you have to film it in English, and it has to be developmentally appropriate. It's staggering, by the way, that, you know, it's costing us about $6 million to produce the films. I have a team of clinicians working with filmmakers in LA right now. They have another 2 weeks. We have another group that's building a campaign which costs around $6 million, to get kids to watch these videos. So it turns out, who influences kids? Not the rabbi, not the child psychiatrist. If you're in high school, it's TikTok stars. Who knew that? And to be brutally honest, I started watching TikTok. It seems idiotic to me. You know, everyone is very sexy and good looking, the young people, and half naked, but they're doing idiotic things. They're throwing paint at each other, they're jumping. somehow these people have a lot of influence over the teenagers. So if we're getting them to talk about these videos, that's good. Kids seem to like cartoons. So the PSAs are about a hedgehog the hedgehog is telling you that you should watch these. And for teachers and parents, we're doing traditional PSAs, the public service announcements. But for teachers, we also built a platform. We're going to give teachers $50. So if you watch 20 minutes of these films, you'll get $50. And if you get 2 more teachers to do it, you'll get $10 each time, but you have to keep answering questions. And our hope would be if we could do this in California, there's no reason why we can't do it in Maryland, in Illinois. I mean, we're talking to Governor Pritzker in Illinois, and we have a new governor who's very progressive when it comes to mental health in New York. And we don't have to charge them the $6 million. We've produced the videos already. We just need the money for the campaign and to incentivize the teachers. But I think that it's clear teachers and parents need a new set of skills. I mean, if you don't have new tools, this COVID is really, just think about it. After 9/11, we lost 3,000 kids in the New York metropolitan area. It went on for at least 3 years before we were back to a real sense of normal, where kids were going back to school, and we could do like circles. I was in a school and I saw the building go down. I was at Stuyvesant. I was at a school and my father, I lived in Staten Island. My father's a fireman. I lost an uncle. I had a best friend who lost a parent. And you could see this ripple effect. COVID, we've lost over 700,000 Americans. I can't imagine the math on that. So I think that we as a nation just have to accept that this is going to take more. This is going to really require you to be a scaffold parent. This means that you really are going to have to, build platforms. You're going to have to be consistent. You're going to have to take care of yourself in a way because it's not a quick fix. In retrospect, it seems that 9/11, which was horrific because I was at NYU then, it just seemed like, now it seems like a sprint compared to this. This is truly a marathon. And
I have to say, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I'm just scaffolding, building on what you're saying, because there's so much in this book that is like these tidbits, right? One of my favorite concepts in your book is what I think you call believe in the moment. Yes. So for those who haven't read it yet, can you share, what does that mean? What's this believe in the moment?
So first of all, I'm a firm believer in making memories. Okay, so just think about that. I tell grandparents all the time to make memories. Do not scold your kids, but be in the moment. Celebrate a birthday. Celebrate Friday night. With my kids, I really went over the board. Whenever I took my kids away on a business trip, took one of them, I would literally rent a convertible, it hurts, and put the top down, it was winter, and blast the heater and the air and the music. And they would, it became a memory of Dad was a little nutty, but we had so much fun, with that convertible. And so believing in the moment is just is a different version of that there are so many wonderful moments of having dinner with your kids and making sure that it is a positive moment. So, why are you lucky today? Why are you happy today? And modeling why you feel lucky or happy. And if no one has died or no one is very ill, then, not doing well in a class or not getting onto the team or, maybe losing a girlfriend or a boyfriend or having a bad fight with a friend makes you unlucky or unhappy. So that's, it seems so trite. You can't do anything about the past and you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But teaching your kids, it's almost that mindfulness of just letting yourself enjoy and live in that moment. And there are ways of doing that for your kid. The other thing that I would like to, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, what are some of those ways? I think there are people who are eager to hear some of those strategies that could be used, and maybe we can talk a little bit about you talk in the Scaffold Effect, you talk about the pillars and planks, and what are some of the strategies that parents can use, and maybe some in specific scenarios.
Sure. So let's make it really easy. Friday night in my house, when my kids were growing up, we tended to be exhausted. We did not go to synagogue. The only time we went to synagogue was when one of the boys was about to be bar mitzvah. So we had to go 10 times. So we'd usually go on Saturday morning to someone else's bar mitzvah. I just have to do a sidebar. We went to someone's bar mitzvah. We were members at Central Synagogue. And I watched one of my oldest son's friend jumped from the front row. He was about to go up in the next 20 minutes and ran out of this is not about the scaffolding, but ran out of the synagogue, and the father ran after him. And I thought, who's going to help? I mean, really, this is a pediatrician can't help, a dentist can help. I might be able to help. So I ran after them, and the boy was hyperventilating, and he was having a panic attack. And so I said to the father very quietly, would you mind if I give him a placebo? I think if I give him a placebo, we might be able to get through this, because I don't, because I said, can you take some deep breaths? You know what I do for a living, let's get belly breathing. I couldn't get anything. So I went to the local little, deli, and I got Anacin, which is a type of aspirin, but it has an A on it. So I figured he'd never seen an Anacin. And there were 2 Anacins in this little paper thing. And I went back into the toilet with, his father and him were staying in the toilet. And I said, it didn't work when I asked him to think of something that made him calm, thinking about the beach. He said, the handle with the toilet paper. I couldn't get this kid to stop. I said, I'm going to give you this pill. And so he took the pill, and he gagged on it, and he spit the pill up, and it was down in the toilet. So I only had one more. So I gave him the pill. I said, swallow slowly. And he said, oh, I feel much better. I said, no, that's impossible. The pill does not work that fast. It's going to take 10 or 15 minutes. You're going to start feeling a warm feeling in your toes, and it's going to go up to your knees, and then you're going to feel it in your thighs. And then eventually it's going to go into your chest. You're going to feel such a sense of relaxation, but it won't go into your head. Your head will be very clear, but you'll feel it in your fingers. So I want you to take a few deep breaths, and now go upstairs back with your father and go to the front of the synagogue. He goes to the front of the synagogue, and he performed beautifully. And my wife said, what did you do? I said, I gave him an Anacin. She said, when does Anacin? I said, I didn't have Xanax, and I wouldn't give Xanax to a kid that I don't know. So, but the best part is my son came home, and he said, what did you do to my friend Brett? He told me you gave him a pill. Where did you find a pill? I mean, nothing like having a smart kid. He said, I bet you gave him a placebo. So I said, I don't know what you're talking about. But there are moments where, we talked about that, that he brought it up. My son brought it up. I feel really lucky that didn't happen to me when I was bar mitzvahed. And also, there's another scene in the book where I'm driving around with that oldest son, and we're listening to NPR, and they're talking about socially anxious kids and how people who are socially anxious are pathologically self-conscious. They can't just chat. And when we get home, and I stopped the car, he said, don't turn the radio off. And when we finish, he says to me, you don't really understand that. Mom and I have to think before we speak. You and Adam just talk. And I thought to myself, he's really giving us at 7 the ability to say, this is hard for me. And so, that's great. If you can get your child to tell you what they need help with, well, then you can practice, right? You can practice shaking hands. You can tell them that when they shake hands, they have to look the person in the eye and be able to tell you what color their irises are. You have to be able to tell them that they should ask 3 you questions, because people love to talk about themselves. And if you play it as a game and it's not judgmental, your kid gets better and better at it. He's never going to be supernatural with it, but it's just the same as Steve Martin throwing the ball. And I think that, that's really important. The other important part about being in the moment is that we tend to criticize our kids because we get a mindset. We have something called confirmation bias. We think this is the lazy child and this is the smart child, and we just keep looking for data that confirms it. It's kind of like why we watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC, because we want to believe what we believe is true. And if the parents watching could just monitor all behavior for 2 weeks. If for 2 weeks you monitored all your children's behavior, and the only thing you paid attention to was catching your child being good, that when your child does something that's good, you actually say, thank you for listening to me so attentively, or thank you for setting the table. You did such a good job, even though you asked them to do it 3 times, or thank you for cleaning up, or thank you so much for telling me that interesting story. It really made me laugh. I'm so glad you told me. And if you do that for 2 weeks and actively ignore insignificant off-task behavior, they're chewing with their mouth open, they didn't put their napkin on their lap, they left the underwear on the floor, just ignore that stuff except when they do something egregious. They bite their sister, they curse you out, then you have to intervene. But if you do that for 2 weeks, two things will happen. Number one, your child will think that the body snatcher took their mother. This couldn't be their mother who's being so positive. And number two, after 2 weeks, your kid is going to give you more and more positive behavior because your child really wants you to praise them. Yeah, there isn't a kid out there who doesn't want the teacher to like him or the parents to like him and to feel proud of them. And sometimes when you're the good child, you get anxious that you're not going to be good enough because after all, it'll be impossible. And if you're the bad child, your self-esteem is such that they're always looking for bad behavior to say, yet again, you didn't prepare your homework. Yet again, the napkin's on the floor. And if you can change your mindset, this is like really redrawing a blueprint, even for a 16-year-old. If you can force yourself to say, let's not talk about the blue in his hair. Let's not talk about the fact that you don't like the way his clothes look. Just focus on important things for 2 weeks. You will change the dynamic. And that's really important. By the way, it works for spouses also. And
well, and I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that as I listened to half the book on Audible and read the other half because I had a very long car drive, 6 hours in each direction.
Whoa.
But you talked about, and it's repeated, this structure is repeated throughout the book, but you talk about structure, support, and encouragement. And in each, and just for those of you who may not have read it yet, there are different scenarios, different, as we know, every child is unique, special, and different. And so how we respond to each is going to be different in each situation and what we need in terms of our own strategies. So that was so helpful to think about that structure, support, and encouragement.
That is the pillar. That no matter what, just think about how wonderful that is. If your kid thinks to themselves, when I go to my parents, I know they're going to be supportive. I know they're going to encourage me. They might give me structure that I don't really want, but they're really on my side. There's also one or two places where I say, never laugh at your kid. Do not tease your kid. You know, my family is very verbal. And so there's sometimes the brothers start biting at each other, you know, don't get sucked into that. You don't need to stop them, but you should not participate. Parents should never tease their kids. It's just not, it's toxic. It just doesn't feel good. It's coercive, corrosive. But I think the other part about being supportive and having structure and being encouraging is that how wonderful to know that your parent has unconditional love for you. Because that's really what this is, to say, no matter what I did, you know, even if it's bad or good, my parents are there for me. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to reinforce bad behavior or things that if your kid's stealing or but there is the benefit of the doubt. But can we figure out how you got into this situation? Is there a way you can get out of it? How can, what are the consequences going to be? It's a whole different way than yelling at your kid. Because a lot of times I think we feel embarrassed. There's two things that happen in our DNA. We want to rescue our kids. And number two, it doesn't take very much for us to be worried about our children or feel guilty about our kids, right? And so if we don't know where we end and they start, it becomes like a reflection. I mean, there's a terrible story about my youngest son. He got drunk when he was in 8th grade. He got so drunk that a friend called me up, a dear friend called me up and said, I have terrible news for you. I was at a dinner party on Wednesday and someone told me that Sam and two of his friends showed up at a party on Saturday night. It was like a benefit for kids where they were trying to raise some money. And he was either stoned out of his head or he was drunk. And my gut response was, you must be mistaken. It can't be Sam. I mean, that's immediately, that was right. And he said, Harold, this is a very hard call for me to make. I hope that someday you don't have to make this call for Katie or for Jake, but I love you. You introduced me to my wife. I wouldn't have kids without you. I just have to tell you, this is what I heard. If you want, I'll give you the names of the people who were talking about you. I thought, oh my God, this is like being a rabbi, right? The rabbi's kids is supposed to be, the child psychiatrist in the village, his kids shouldn't be wacky. And so I was thinking about it. And then I remember we left the house. Two of his friends were there, and Sam is too cool for school. This is my youngest son, and very attractive, and everything comes easy. And we were supposed to actually go to an event at NYU where one of my colleagues had won the Nobel Prize, and there was a celebration. So I had my tuxedo at the office, and I called up my wife and I said, at 5 o'clock, when she's a school teacher, I told her, and she said, no, you must be mistaken. It can't be Sam. I said, no, I'm 3 hours ahead of you. It's definitely Sam. And so I said, just tell him he's grounded and we'll deal with it later. And she said, we're not going to that party tonight. Come home and help deal with this. I mean, this was an unpleasant situation where, no one, when your parents said this hurts me more than it hurts you, it's very hard to sit with your kid and tell him how disappointed you are in his behavior and that you have to give him a consequence. And he's crying because he knows he's broken your trust. I mean, he drank booze. And when we told him we're going to have to call the other parents because the booze were consumed in our house, and he was devastated by that. And by the way, and there had to be a consequence. The consequence for this very social kid was that for the next month, he had no social life. I mean, we were his social life, which, trust me, was not a good social life. But our feeling was, if he did it again, the consequence would have been even greater because he broke the rules of the house. He knows he should have been drinking. But those are moments where, if you don't handle them correctly, I mean, there's a gut feeling where you just want to scream and yell and tell him how embarrassed you are because of his behavior and how it reflected on you. That's just not helpful. I mean, trust me, I wanted to do that. I literally wanted to go to the school, pull him out of the school and beat him on the street so everyone could see how serious I was about this. But that was only inside my head. I was able to say, let's just, and my wife and I played tag on that one. She said, I don't know what, we didn't have an answer. We just didn't know what to do. So we said to him, I think we should go to our own corners and we'll figure this out. And then, after you calm down, you think, what is the goal? How are we going to try to get him not to do this again? I was really worried that he had smoked marijuana after he made a promise to me that he wouldn't. And so, but he was devastated by the fact that he saw that he lost our trust. That was hurt him more than anything else, which was good that he cared about that. But we had to work to get back to that position because, 8th grade is a little early it's very early for you to start messing around with alcohol. The best part was when my wife said, how much did you drink? And he said 3 shots. And my wife said, we don't have shot glasses. What were you using? And he said, the orange juice glasses. So he thought, oh my God, he drank 3 orange juice glasses full of vodka. I mean, we thought, it's amazing he could make it out of the house, So, but I think we all will go through this. There's going to be bumps in the road, and how you handle it is really very important. And again, remembering that you're the scaffold, that I think the message, just think about it when our kids were very little, when they were 4 or 5, how easy it was to dress our kids in the morning. If you picked out their clothes the night before, so you knew that the kid would wear that, that was okay, the colors were okay, the material was okay. You just take their clothes off, the pajamas off, you put the clothes on, and you're done. Well, they never learned to put on their clothes themselves. The message is, you're a baby, you can't do it. If you put the clothes out the night before and you let them do it themselves, now the shirt might be on backwards, they may need some help with the socks, so it's lined up. But after a while, 2 things have happened. Number 1, they feel confident. And number 2, they're doing something that's going to make your life easier. They are able to dress themselves. And that's a great message. You are capable. I know you're capable. Instead of a covert message, you're not that capable. I have to do this for you.
So I think that's actually a great segue to a question that was asked in a variety of ways by a few parents. Where a lot of us are curious, what do you see as the biggest challenge of embracing this scaffolded parenting in our current, and like Manhattan, in so many ways, the DC metro area is like this, in this hyper achievement and outcome oriented society, right? How do you balance that?
So it's not in the book, but when was the first thought of scaffold parenting? And it was around 32 years ago. It was summertime. My wife was actually out in the Hamptons with the 3 kids, and I was having dinner with another summer bachelor. And in passing, he said, do you know Dickie Schwartz? And I said, yes. And he said, well, he's a total wuss. Why would you say he's a total wuss? And he said, Harold, he's worked for Lehman Brothers, Salomon Brothers. I can't remember which brother he worked for, and Harold at best. So I said, well, he must make a ton of money. This is 32 years ago. And he said to me, Harold, at best, he makes $400,000 a year. And I was the youngest chief of child psychiatry in the country. And I think I was making $105,000. I thought I'm a pretty successful man. And he said, so-and-so, he works with Drexel Burnham. He can barely put two sentences together. He makes $1 million. So-and-so, he makes $2 million. And I sat there thinking to myself, oh my God, everyone I know must make $1 million a year. I missed the day in school where they taught you how to do that. Someone ripped the pages out of my book. I can't believe. And then I started thinking, does everyone know I don't make $1 million? And I was trying to be very calm, but clearly I twitched or something. And the guy said to me, Harold, you can't compare yourself to these people. After all, you're just a physician. I thought, just a physician? Does he know how hard it was to get into medical school? I mean, I thought to myself, the one thing I know for sure is I'm not paying the bill. Because this guy is very frugal and I usually pick up the tab, but he clearly makes $1 million a year if he thinks, so I waited, picks up the tab. We're on 92nd Street, between 92nd and 93rd on Madison Avenue. He lives on Madison Avenue, so he goes home first. It's a beautiful summer night and I am out of my mind. I'm thinking to myself, how did I make this mistake? I can't believe it. I'm a failure. I mean, I really started to feel incredibly inadequate. And as I got to 91st, between 91st and 90th, walking up the block is Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, they were young then, okay? This is a long time. She still had blonde hair. He had his arm wrapped around her. He's shorter than you would have expected. He has blue eyes. He cheated. He was wearing a seersucker suit. He had the jacket over. He actually had hair trends, so you could see plugs in his hair. And I am way too cool to say hello. And as they get closer to me and they say, hi, how are you? I said, I'm fine, how are you? What a beautiful night. I said, yes, it's a gorgeous night. We're so lucky to live in New York, aren't we? And what a great neighborhood. I said, yes, we really are so lucky. Well, enjoy the evening. We hope we'll see you soon. I said, yes, I hope we'll see you. I'll see you too. And as I walked away, instead of thinking two of the most famous movie stars at the time thought they knew me, right? All I could think of is that each one of them was making more than $1 million a year. So I remember calling my wife about it. My wife said, are you out of your mind? You love being a child psychiatrist. You're really great at being a child psychiatrist. If you want to make $1 million a year, you have to do something else. But this is absurd. It was that moment where I thought to myself, if you live in these bubbles, where everyone is either making $1 million a year or $1 billion a year now, or has a Pulitzer Prize, or has an Oscar, or has a Tony Award, and everything looks, and you have a kid who is struggling with math or is struggling with reading, you can make that kid feel very, very inadequate. And it's the parent's job not to create a bubble, but to create that scaffolding. And it's really that old. It took 30 years ago where I thought to myself, and just a few years later, one of my kids really became clear to us how bad his reading was, and that's what our job was, that we had to give him, we couldn't read for him. We couldn't fix this for him. We could get him an expert and we could try to make him feel just great about his effort, but that reading was never going to be super easy for him. And I think that's the strongest message I'd like to give, is that the world, these bubbles can really be intimidating. It can intimidate. I would become a child psychiatrist again in a New York minute. I love being a child psychiatrist. I love being a doctor. I mean, I have lots of colleagues who can't wait to retire, who are doing other specialties. They're going to carry me out of the Child Mind Institute. I mean, there's so many wonderful things we're doing there, and we're making progress. But I just don't make a ton of money. And if I want, and now it's billions of dollars. Now these hedge, I never heard of a hedge fund or private equity when I was growing up. And if someone told me you worked for a bank, I thought you were a teller. It just, being a doctor was like a really good thing to do. But I think that if we aren't protective of our kids, not to the outside world, but to their own self-esteem, because that's what scaffolding is really doing. It is building self-esteem, and self-esteem is built upon real accomplishments, and real accomplishments is practicing to catch the ball. Real accomplishments is, one of my kids decided he wanted to do tap dancing. My wife signed him up for tap dancing, and after 2 sessions, he said, I don't want to do this anymore. There are only girls in the class. And my wife said, oh, you only have 8 more sessions. And he said, no, you don't understand. I don't want to do it anymore. And my wife said, I do understand. You signed up for 10 sessions. Well, after the 8th session or something, he got some skills. He kept tap dancing for 3 or 4 more years. He eventually actually tap danced with Savion Glover, believe it or not. And when he was applying to college, the college advisor said, is there anything special? And he said, I tap dance. So, and we didn't do it to make the resume, but getting your kids to endure and to stick with something is really so important. And particularly if they have a mental health disorder or a learning disability. And, you know, if you think about it, if it's not your children, it's it's your best friend's kids, it's your niece or nephew. These are endemic issues which make parenting so much harder and scaffolding so much more important. And particularly now during COVID, being, doing self-care, being consistent, talking about moments that are really precious and celebrating those moments. Tell me, graduation, drive-by graduations suck, right? But if that's what you had, you better make that moment great, because the kids who are 13 and 24 lost things that they can't replace. So parents have to say, how special. We'll film the drive-by, graduation. Look, 40 of our friends showed by, 30 of your friends came by. Remember, in 2020, it was really dangerous to have those graduation parties. And we're making, today in New York, we had a Columbus Day parade. So we're slowly getting out of it. So, but in the meantime, I think protecting our kids and supporting them and providing them encouragement with structure is so very important.
Well, thank you. I can't thank you enough. I highly, highly recommend this book. And Rabbi Shankman and I both have read and listened to parts of it. We're so appreciative of everything that you've brought to this conversation, and to loop us back to where we began, right? May we all have the opportunity, may everyone we know sleep for at least 7 hours. May we all get 20 minutes of exercise.
Just 7 hours. 7 hours doesn't seem like that much, right? And 20 minutes of exercise and
eating something green. I just,
right.
And I'll tell my daughter, it's not just green M&Ms and gummy bears, but perhaps even something else.
Salad, lettuce, but the other issue that another resource that we have built is childmind.org. And there's a reason we went from 500,000 unique visitors to 1.6 or 1.7 million a month, is that if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you think your kid might actually be struggling, please don't hesitate. Take our symptom checker. It'll make you so much better a parent to call your pediatrician and say, I took the symptom checker and it popped up that my kid has a lot of anxiety symptoms. Who is the doctor in the community that really does anxiety well? You mean it's not just any psychiatrist or psychologist who knows the evidence-based treatments for anxiety disorders? That's what we want. You want them to be informed parents. It's really been fun talking to you. The time just really flew by. So
the time flew. I will say, and I will take the liberty of saying to those of you who are joining us on this call, that we at Washington Hebrew Congregation, we want to be a part of your scaffold. We want to be here to support the work that you're doing in finding additional resources, in taking those mindfulness and spiritual moments. And we come from a tradition where even when we gather on Passover, right, we have 4 children, we have lots of ways of asking questions. We are all born of a tradition that sees everyone as unique, that recognizes that each child and each human being not just is made in the image of God, but that all of those images require personalized attention. So thank you.
And a different type of support and a different type of structure, but they all need
Absolutely. They all need it. So thank you so much. I hope Rabbi Shankman has placed in the chat, again, the link to buy your book and to get access to all of the resources you've shared. We thank you so much for taking time to be with us this evening.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope next time is in person.
Yes, me too.